Your Excellencies, ministers, officials, entrepreneurs, experts, friends of the Arctic, it's my honor to welcome you to the Arctic Circle Forum in the Faroe Islands, and also express my profound thanks to the Foreign Ministry of the Faroe Islands and the government and all the others who have come together here in the islands to allow us to host the 7th Arctic Circle Forum in this great country. It's only 5 years since we founded the Arctic Circle with the first assembly in Iceland in October of 2013, and in this short time it has grown into the largest international gathering on the Arctic, a dynamic and inspirational network of people coming together to plan and discuss the future of this important and large part of the planet. It is indeed perhaps worth reflecting on it here in the Faroe Islands that for centuries the Arctic was completely unknown to the enlightened and educated Western world. And that's why the explorers from Norway and Canada and other countries who ventured into the Arctic in the early years of the 20th century became world famous. And then the Cold War, for half a century, closed this territory again. So paradoxically, it is only in the last 20 or 30 years that the nations of the world, humankind, has had the opportunity to come together in a dialogue and cooperation on this fundamental and important part of the planet. An enormous part of the planet, almost the size of Africa. And when we are everywhere in the world struggling with the effects of climate change and other challenges facing the world, it has become even more crucial. To many, the front line of what's happening to our planet. For a number of years, towards the end of the last century and in the beginning of the 21st century, the Arctic gatherings were relatively small and specialized. And the purpose of establishing the Arctic Circle 5 years ago was to create a large international platform where all the stakeholders came together to impress not only upon ourselves but also on everybody else the great significance of the Arctic, and to welcome also into the Arctic dialogue nations from other continents and other parts of the world who also have a great stake in our future. There was a saying in Iceland when I was growing up, and in fact long into my life, and I think similarly here in the Faroe Islands, that we, the small nations who live on these islands, were living at the edge of the known world. And we kind of told ourselves that we were at the very end of the territory of dialogue and cooperation. But now, all of a sudden, in the last few years, we have found ourselves in the center of a new important geopolitical area where all the leading economies of the world, from Europe, from Asia, United States, Canada, and Russia, come together. And we see it here in the attendance at the Arctic Circle Forum in the Faroe Islands, how global and international the dialogue and the cooperation on the Arctic has become. The annual assemblies in Iceland have in the last 3 years welcomed over 2,000 participants from more than 60 countries. And if anybody doubts the international significance of the Arctic dialogue, they only have to witness those assemblies. And in addition, less than 3 years ago, in order to meet the international demand for extending the dialogue and the cooperation on the Arctic, we decided to hold more specialized and smaller in scale forums in other countries. The first was in Alaska, nearly 3 years ago, on ports and shipping. The second was in Singapore, on the Asian view and participation in the Arctic. The third one was in Greenland, on the economic empowerment of the indigenous populations across the Arctic. It turned out to become the largest international gathering in the history of Greenland. And I am also pleased to announce that this forum here in the Faroe Islands is also developing into the largest international gathering in the history of the Faroe Islands. And together with the similar characteristics of the assemblies in Iceland, I think it proves for these three Atlantic neighbors how our own global neighborhood has been transformed. The fourth forum was in Quebec, in Canada, on economic and social planning of these vast territories of the planet. And the fifth one in Washington, D.C., on the involvement of Russia and the United States in the Arctic. I think it's the only gathering ever to take place in the capital of the United States to deliberately discuss the joint involvement of Russia and the United States in the Arctic, where, by the way, they have cooperated rather constructively in recent years, despite conflicts in other parts. And it is of great importance to maintain that relatively open and harmonious dialogue and cooperation in our part of the world. And the sixth forum was in Scotland in November, hosted in Edinburgh by the Government of Scotland. I think I'm right in saying it was also the first time in the history of Scotland that a systematic gathering to examine the dynamic transformation north of Scotland took place. And on the basis of the success of that forum, the Scottish government decided to formulate an Arctic Northern policy for the first time in the history of that great country. And now we are assembled here in the Faroe Islands, to some extent closing the circle of forums and assemblies ranging from Greenland to Iceland to Scotland and the Faroe Islands. And that by itself, I think, also demonstrates the creation of a new form of cooperation in the North Atlantic. And from here, as you will hear later on, we will move to Asia, where we will hold the next two forums in leading Asian countries. It is indeed quite remarkable to see this series of gatherings in different parts of the world, creating and maintaining and expanding this extraordinary, constructive and diverse dialogue on the Arctic, where political leaders, officials, business leaders, scientists, experts, environmentalists, and ordinary citizens and students and young people come together in a new way. It is to some extent inspiring that despite all the conflicts and the problems in other parts of the world, we are moving forward in the North and the Arctic in a new cooperative model of constructive change and progress. And hopefully, as we have also witnessed in the Arctic Circle assemblies and in some of the forums, this is being noticed in other parts of the world. Last October in Iceland, we had a delegation from the Pacific Island states who had discovered and up here in the Arctic and the North, there were models of excellence in many areas being created in the responsible use of ocean resources, in connectivity and information technology, in health services and other areas. Traveling across the world to learn from Iceland and other parts of the Arctic, and hopefully coming next October here to the Faroe Islands to witness for themselves the success of the communities in the Arctic. It has been, for me, one of the most remarkable parts of this effort to see the global significance for other continents and faraway parts of the planet of what we are doing here in our Arctic northern neighborhood. So perhaps during those 2 days of reflection and dialogue, we keep in mind that we are not only strengthening and expanding our own framework of cooperation, we are also creating inspirational models for people in other parts of the world who are also struggling how in remote places and vast territories they can create a successful future for themselves. So with these words, I welcome you again. I express my profound gratitude to the government of the Faroe Islands and to all the people who have prepared this forum, both in the Secretariat of the Arctic Circle in Reykjavik and in the various offices here in the Faroe Islands. These people are of a young generation, most of them, and it has been also inspirational to see their enthusiasm and their dedication to the furtherance of this cooperation. And with these words, I give the floor to the Foreign Minister of the Faroe Islands, who will, on behalf of the government, welcome you to this forum. Thank you.